Good afternoon and welcome to Medill Newsmakers. I'm Meryl Durezzo. Today, we will be venturing into the world of entomophagy, or in layman's terms, the world of eating bugs. Noma, the #1 restaurant in the world, serves ants on its menu. Many upscale dining experiences are now incorporating insects into their food. However, bugs are not reserved only for the wealthy. Entomophagy, the consumption of insects as food, is a growing trend around the world. The consumption of insects as food is not a new concept. Many cultures have eaten bugs for thousands of years. There is an audience for entomophagy. Whether a person is concerned about the environmental well-being of our planet, is thinking in terms of economic value for the future, or is simply interested in pushing the limits of normal food consumption, there are many reasons to give it a shot and down a bug or two. Leviticus 11:22. Even these of them you may eat, the locust after his kind, and the bald locust after his kind, and the beetle after his kind, and the grasshopper after his kind. People have been eating bugs since the cave days. Ancient Greeks and Romans ate locusts and beetle larvae. Australian Aborigines cooked moths in the sand, and Africans eat termites and caterpillars. North America is one of the few places in the world where there is still a strong stigma against eating insects, even though studies have shown that insects are cleaner than lobsters and crabs. Why don't we eat bugs? After all, people have been doing it for millennia. Joining us today is the living invertebrate specialist at the Chicago Academy of Sciences and its Peggy Nobart Nature Museum, Alan Lawrence. Thanks so much for joining us today, Alan.
Thank you for having me.
So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your experience with entomophagy.
Well, I have some firsthand experience actually eating insects. As part of my graduate studies at the University of Illinois, I had to teach a course where one of our lessons was on entomophagy. So I've cooked up buffets for my students and forced them all to eat them and rate which ones were their favorites. And I, of course, had to eat them too to get them to eat them themselves.
And what was your favorite?
My favorite were waxworms. They've got kind of a buttery taste. I made them into tacos, so they were quite tasty. I find it's most successful, at least for my students, to try and work the insects into a bigger dish as an ingredient, so it's not necessarily like you're eating only the insect. So I've had good success with cricket cookies and mealworm pie, like a pecan pie with the mealworms mixed in. With the pecans.
I've heard that there is a philosophy of a 2-to-1 ratio, where you have 2 familiar ingredients and then 1 unfamiliar, which would be an insect.
That is a good idea. And you don't have to have the insects actually visible in the dish. You can just grind them up and get all the nutritional benefits from them.
And why did you do that in the class that you had?
It was part of the course was called Insects and People, so it's about the relationship between insects and how they affect human cultures, and entomophagy, as you mentioned, has been a part of human culture for thousands of years. So we teach the students about different dishes that are served throughout the world, and then also try and get them to get over the stigma of it and at least try it.
Could you speak a little bit about those dishes and the cultures they come from?
Well, we have some right from the U.S. Around Mono Lake, there are huge swarms of alkali flies that come out every year, so natives would prepare those. Also, there are some moths that fed on Ponderosa pine trees that could be collected and eaten. In Mexico, stink bugs are used in the wrappings for tamales to add some extra flavor. They also eat honeypot ants. Australia will also eat honeypot ants. These ants collect nectar in their butts. It kind of expands, so it's like a whole sack of sweet material. You can just eat that.
Could you speak a little bit about those dishes?
And also in Mexico, there's, if you've ever had mezcal, sometimes there's a worm in there. That's the gusanos de maguey. That is put in the mezcal to prove 2 things. 1, that it comes from the right region where the insect is found, and 2, that the alcohol is of sufficient quality that the insect can stay preserved. It has to be at least 70% alcohol for the insect to not break down in it.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting.
I mean, there are numerous examples. Some things I fed the students, again, were the waxworm tacos, silkworm pupa stir fry, shrimp cocktail, because shrimp are arthropods, they're closely related to insects. The pie, Also fried crickets, grasshoppers, they're all sorts of edible insects. Most insects are edible.
And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the ecological benefits.
Oh, well, there are many. One is that insects have a much better efficiency of conversion of the food that they eat than large game animals. So it doesn't take as much energy to raise the equivalent amount of, say, like grasshoppers as it would beef. So also they can be grown in a smaller area, so it has a less impact on the environment just to raise this for human consumption.
I think I heard the term mini I forget what it's called actually. But no, that's great. And what about economic benefits?
Well, insects are typically eaten in areas where they do not have many large game animals, such as the southwest U.S., where it's kind of deserty. It's hard to grow livestock. Also, areas that have a low ecological productivity. So these are sort of areas where insects are the only source of meat available. So really, it could be one of the few drivers of a local economy, at least within the cultures while they, before globalization. But
I think I heard the term. And what do you think of entomophagy? Do you think it's something that can catch on for the future? But no.
I think it's something
and
that
what about economic
may have trouble in Western culture ever catching on, but we have come a long way. As you said, some high-class restaurants are now serving insects, but also there are restaurants in Chicago that have always served insects that aren't necessarily expensive. There's a Thai place called Sticky Rice I've been to where you can get omelets made with ant eggs, and it's delicious, I'll tell you that. I've had it myself. You can also get fried bamboo caterpillars. They're not as delicious. I think one of the big barriers for the acceptance of insects is that there aren't many options for good insects. Most things you can buy are dried and they're fried and kind of old, so it's like eating stale French fries. You wouldn't really want to eat French fries that are more than a day old, right?
No.
I feel the same thing about insects. If they were prepared fresh, they might take more. But also, for example, lobster and shrimp were once thought of as peasant food. High-class society would never eat them, but now look at it. Lobster sells for a premium.
That's true. And what do you think the stigma is?
The stigma is just that insects are gross and that they shouldn't be around our house. But really, people need to get over that. We're already eating insects. Most food items have sort of a food defect level that's set by the FDA of what allowable levels of non-harmful contamination is in our food. So when you're eating things like flour and peanut butter and chocolate, we're already eating insect fragments. You just don't know it. Chocolate can have as much as, I believe it's 60 parts per 100 grams. 60 fragments.
And is there an insect that you're interested in trying and you haven't tried yet?
Oh, there are so many. Mopane worms are something I really want to try that are from South Africa. They're these big, really fat caterpillars. They look pretty meaty.
You might ask.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Colored purple. Northwestern University.
Coming up after the break, we'll be joined by Chicago researcher David Lowenstein. Also, we'll get some testimonials from experienced bug eaters, what they eat and why.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
And is there an insect that you're interested in trying and you haven't tried yet? Coming up after the break, we'll be joined by Chicago researcher David Lowenstein. Also, we'll get some testimonials from experienced bug eaters, what they eat and why.
Why spend your entire life looking for some on-ramp to the road to opportunity when there's already a well-traveled path? So you may be wondering, what does that path look like? Is it paved with gold? Well, here's a hint. It's actually paved with purple. Northwestern University. Your road starts here.
Welcome back. With us now is David Lowenstein, a Chicago entomologist, or insect scientist. Hey David, how are you?
I'm doing well.
I appreciate you coming today, thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
So I was hoping that you could speak a little bit about your research and how it relates to entomophagy.
Sure. So I primarily research bees and wasps. Those are my interests, and looking at their interests in agriculture. So right now I'm working on a project looking at parasitoid wasps. These are a group of beneficial insects that they sting and lay their eggs inside pests, such as caterpillars and cabbage loopers. So they provide a good service by stinging these insects and controlling them so they don't grow in population and defoliate plants. Some of the connections that could be made with entomophagy relate to these pest insects. So normally in agriculture, when there's an insect pest, a grower will tend to spray insecticides to control them. But instead of spraying insecticides, there might be an opportunity to utilize these crop pests and harvest them as a source of food.
Huh. And how would you go about harvesting these insects?
So when the insects are in the field, when the crops are in flower or blooming, there tends to be a lot of them. Often when there's a high density of plants present, there's going to be a high density of insect pests because they enjoy eating the plants. So it could be as simple as sending people out to harvest and hand-pick these insects off of the plant, similar to what happens for many of the crops in this country, where people will hand-pick blueberries or strawberries.
And do you know that these insects are edible?
Not personally, but many of these crop pests, they're not toxic. So certainly more research will be needed to identify whether these would be edible or palatable. And I'm sure that there would be chefs or other individuals that would be more than willing to try them, because there are so many of these crop pests in agricultural fields.
And so what would it mean for the agriculture if we eliminated these crop pests? The crop pests would serve as a food source, and then what would it mean for the plant life?
Mm-hmm. So ideally, by removing the pest, at least from the plant that it feeds on, it would limit the amount of damage to this plant. So your growers would spend less time and less money trying to control the pest. They could spray less insecticides perhaps, and this can have a broader impact. With less insecticides, there might be less damage to non-target and beneficial insects such as bees. There could also be a positive impact for birds and higher order mammals as well. And then perhaps the insects will decide to feed another plant that's not of economic interest.
What would it mean and for so have you ever eaten an insect before? Do you think you ever will if you haven't?
I have not eaten any insects before. I don't plan to. I'm an observant Jewish individual, so in the scriptures, insects are not permitted to eat, with the exception of a couple grasshoppers, interestingly. And there are a couple communities that they do eat these grasshoppers, and if given the opportunity, I might, but I don't know where to find them, so I will probably not be eating them anytime soon.
And do you know why grasshoppers?
It could relate to the fact that they're a swarming insect, and there's just so many of them when they swarm. Especially, there's a certain population in Middle Eastern areas. Every several years or so, there'll be millions of them. And there are all these insects, and people might not have as much food, so here's a source of protein. If there's millions and millions of insects, and it's more costly to raise animals that we normally domesticate, so why not use the insects on the ground?
That's so great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time in coming today.
Sure, thank you.
After the break, world-famous bug chef and author David George Gordon will explain his views on entomophagy and some of the crazier experiences he's had sharing his passion with the public. Also, a few first-hand accounts.
And there's just so many of them when they swarm. Especially, there's a certain population in Middle Eastern areas. Every several years or so, there'll be millions of them. And there are all these insects, and people might not have as much food, so here's a source of protein. There's millions and millions
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Animals that we domesticate.
thank you so much. I really appreciate your time coming today. After the break, world-famous bug chef and author David George Gordon will explain his views on entomophagy and some of the crazier experiences he's had sharing his passion with the public. Also, a few first-hand accounts.
Why hang around waiting for opportunity to knock when instead you can track opportunity down and knock on its door? You might ask, what's the best way to identify where opportunity lives? Here's a hint. Its door is colored purple. Northwestern University. Opportunity awaits your knock.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
David George Gordon, also known as the Bug Chef, is best known for his out-of-the-ordinary presentations and various literary works. Earlier, he discussed his unique interests.
I first started eating bugs in about 1996 or 97. And again, this was before shows like Fear Factor or Bizarre Foods or all that. So most of that information was in science journals. I eventually got enough of that information and I kind of got the idea that rather than writing a book about eating bugs, it would be more fun to write a cookbook. And that's when I really, with great passion, started working on eating insects to develop those recipes. When I do a cooking demonstration, I start out by telling people, we talk about a lot of stuff. We talk about how we develop food preferences. I mean, a lot of people in our society are averse to eating insects. They think insects are gross and disgusting and germy. Of course, they're none of those things when you really think about it. But we have a real attitude. I call it bug bashing. So I talk a lot about getting over that. I talk about the fact that we eat all sorts of weird foods ourselves. Chicken eggs, when you think about it, are really weird. It's basically eating the chickens, period. Think about that, because we grew up eating those things. So I talk about that. I talk about the environmental benefits, and really the whole notion of just broadening your palate and trying something new. So I usually, during a cooking demonstration, I'll make like 4 different dishes, and I'll actually escalate. I'll start out with something simple like tempura battered mealworms that are deep fried. You know, they look like Cheetos when they're done, so there's no real challenge there. By the end of the program, we're eating things like grasshopper kebabs and scorpion scallopini and all sorts of wild stuff. But people come up from the audience to try these dishes. They always act like, I'm amazed I'm still alive. It's not something they're used to eating, you know? So, yeah, I think people learn a lot, but I try not to make it a real preachy event. I want to be entertaining as well. A lot of people say, I think it's really funny. They go, not bad. Like that's, you know, I'm still alive, basically. Some people say it's pretty good. And some people I've actually had come back for seconds.
Really?
You know, my all-time favorite story, I actually wrote about this in the Eat a Bug cookbook, was a kid. I was doing a program and this kid kept coming back for seconds and thirds. And he had fifths of this crickets and orzo pasta. And when he was done, I said to him, don't they feed you at home? And he said, this is way better than anything my mom ever made. Well, I think crickets are actually very easy. For For one thing, you can just buy them at Petco or PetSmart or someplace. The thing is that's nice about them is they're available year-round. It doesn't take a real lot to prepare them. If you buy live crickets and you freeze them in your freezer and then sort them out, rinse them off, they can be incorporated in all sorts of different stir-fries and things like that. They have a very mild shrimp-like taste. And there's also this important thing about the visual value. If you look at something and it looks weird to you, your stomach is going to start objecting. I have a recipe in my book for fried green tomato hornworm. And these are really large caterpillars. They're about yay big, they're green. They do not look like food. And I remember even working on my book, this is after months of cooking on my recipes. When I got to that one, I could feel my stomach kind of going, are you sure you're supposed to eat these? Well, they're actually quite tasty, but just getting up the courage, they look like something that would probably make you sick. That's what your stomach is telling you. Don't go there. Oh gosh. Well, Time Magazine said my crickets and orzo pasta, the one I was talking about earlier, is my signature dish. But what I really like to make, and this sounds weird, is I really like to make deep-fried tarantula spiders. Something they do in Cambodia. I've seen photographs of that. I've never been to Cambodia. But I'll take a tarantula that's been frozen and defrosted, so it's not alive anymore. I take off its abdomen. I singe off its hairs with a little creme brulee torch or a lighter or something like that, so it doesn't have all those hairs. Dip it in tempura batter and then deep fry it. And meat is basically muscle, whether we're talking about a cow or a pig or a chicken. It's the muscle that we like. There's a lot of muscle in the legs of a tarantula. They're very supple if you've ever watched one walk around. So those legs are really fabulous. I think if it was my birthday and they said you can have anything you want today, I'd say I'd like a lobster or I'd like a tarantula spider. Right now it's remarkably trendy, and I think every other day I see a new newspaper report about how restaurants are starting to pick up on this. There's a restaurant, I live in Seattle, there's a restaurant here called Shanique that now serves a cricket flatbread that's really great using cricket flour. There are all these companies right now, like startups and things that are making different kinds of foods. So it's hard for me to tell. It's very hard to predict a food trend. Who would have thought that sushi was going to be as popular as it is today? But I do see that there's a really growing momentum. Whether it's really going to become a mainstream thing is anybody's guess at this point.
Joining me now are Jean Chang and Fernando Ding, who have first-hand accounts with eating insects. Hi guys, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi.
I appreciate it. Thanks for coming in. So I was wondering, first if you could just introduce yourselves very briefly and talk a little bit about where you were when you ate it and what you ate.
Okay, so my name is Fernando Ding, and I was with a friend from Italy in Shanghai, and she kind of talked about like she's incredibly interested in eating insects because she's never tried it before. So she asked me to take her somewhere in Shanghai that could find like insects cuisine. So I looked up it online and find a restaurant. So we went there and kind of like have a dish with 3 sort of insects, fried bees, fried grasshoppers, and then a sort of white worms. So I don't exactly know what it is, but it tastes just like normal protein that's get fried. So I think it tastes okay. I cannot say it's delicious or it's gross. It's just okay. So. Yeah, so that's my story in Shanghai.
Jean, what about you?
I'm from Taiwan, and basically I don't know that there is someone eating insects in Taiwan before. But one time when I was 10 years old, and I traveled with my family on the mountain, and then so there's a dish, and my parents just ordered some like fried bees pupa, and also the fried crickets. Yeah, and then. And the first time I just think, oh no, I cannot do it because it really seems very terrible. And then my parents just say, yeah, okay, you can try. So I just try a little bit, and then I feel like, just like Fernando said, it's not a very different taste. So because the fried things, that you would just feel very crunchy. And then also there's a egg side fried egg aside it.
Oh, okay.
So it's not very the strong taste of the insects. But I think it's a very cool experience that I can show people. I have eaten insects.
Yeah, that's the cultural capital. Yeah.
What eventually made you decide, okay, I'm going to try this?
I think it's curiosity because the dish already on the table, and then maybe I think that will be my only time I try in my life.
Yeah.
And so would you recommend what you ate to somebody else?
Well, personally, I think I will because it's really interesting and it's really like an experience and you can show and you can talk about. Like now we got a chance to be invited here and make an interview here. So I think it's really great experience. So I will definitely recommend it.
Yeah, for me, it's especially like foreigners. If they come to Taiwan, I'll especially will recommend to eat. I bet that they won't eat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now that you guys have had this experience, would you ever do it again?
I wouldn't, to be honest. Although, as I said, it doesn't taste that much difference, but sometimes when you think about it, it's just a little bit gross. So.
Yeah, because as you see the dish on the table, it seems like it's still a little cannot accept it. But I think based in terms of the unique experience, I can accept like one time, but I'm not sure is that like a regular food in my life.
And so is it a popular thing to do in China, in Shanghai?
I don't think so because that's kind of a niche restaurant, and it really took me a lot of effort to find it. Yeah, in fact, I'm surprised that I eventually find it online.
Yeah, it's not a regular food, but I found online that there's a night market in Taiwan. So some of the stands sell that, and I read the news about one man that is 23 years old and he cannot find a job, so he's initiated the stands that sells the fried crickets, and it sells a lot. And helps him to earn a lot of money. So I think it's very interesting. Like I think most of the people still are curious about what's that food is. So basically that sales works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you guys had both of you had it in kind of a fried form.
Yeah.
And a lot of high-end restaurants around the world are now including insects into their menus. Do you think you would try at a place like that to get maybe more of the insect's natural flavor and kind of prepared in a different way than you've had it? I know you said you didn't want to try it, but it was prepared so differently.
I think if too raw, I don't dare to try it. Honestly.
Well, I will.
You mean raw?
If it says high-end restaurant, I will give it a chance.
Because it's fresh, and then you won't get.
I mean, it's a different experience than before. Like it's like before, it's in you have it in a stand. I have it in a like niche restaurant, and it's all fried. So why not in another form and try it again?
Yeah. Actually, I want to share another experience that I went to Peru and have a traveling, and then I went to Amazon forest, and the guide just demonstrate this. I can eat the insects, so he just eating and then just eating the turbines on his arms, and he said, "Oh, that's really healthy." And then every guest just shocked. What he really just ate it at that time in the Amazon forest.
So you
it's
can eat
really
it just
cool.
natural.
Yeah, it's natural.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a blast. We'll see you next time on Medill Newsmakers.